Nixon had, sorry, everybody, hello, Doreen, welcome. Let me just get, one second. You got it? Okay. There was a very famous conversation. I actually mentioned it at High Holidays, one of my favorite Golda-isms, that she commented about Henry Kissinger. There was a scene, so I mentioned it at High Holidays. I don't expect you to remember this, but it wasn't that long ago. But I talked about how during the Yom Kippur War, Nixon was bragging to Golda about his country, about the United States is so diverse that we have people from all different backgrounds. He says, even our Secretary of State, who would be the equivalent of your foreign minister, is a Jew, right? Talking about Henry Kissinger. So Nixon was bragging about his Jewish foreign minister, who, by the way, as we know now, Nixon was fairly anti-Semitic at a baseline, just said bad things about Jews. He's on record. I mean, he's on the tapes saying bad things about Jews. He's old school, whatever, I'm not making excuses for it, but so anyway, so he was bragging about his own personal Jew, Henry Kissinger. So at which point Golda Meir said to Nixon, well, we too have a Jewish foreign minister, as you know. It was Abba Eban at the time. He says, the only thing is that our foreign minister speaks better English than yours. And Abba Eban was an Oxford educated, literally taught at Cambridge, and Abba Eban was very eloquent. He was the UN ambassador for Israel for many years, and Abba Eban wrote books and did documentaries about Jewish history. He did speak English very well. And it was an interesting point that essentially, again, that Golda was making clear that we also in Israel have people who speak every language and can speak to every audience in their native language and in their vernacular, which of course is one of the successes that Netanyahu's had over the years. It's one of the successes that Israel's had in communicating, because they have people from, a lot of you have seen the IDF spokesman, Conricus. He speaks all the time, Conricus. He speaks good English, but he speaks with an accent. It's because he's Swedish. So he's a guy who can speak to a Swedish audience in perfect, he's from Malmo in Sweden. He can speak perfect Swedish to that audience. But, and of course, Israel had people who could speak in German and Russian and French. And it has been one of the strengths of Israel. Yes.
Hey, Rabbi.
Yes.
Is there a spokesman that's Irish?
For Israel?
Yeah, sounds like he's got an accent. One of the guys.
Well, Conricus kind of maybe sounds European, but maybe
that's it.
No, the weird thing is that Isaac Herzog, the president, who you see a lot. I saw him on. Herzog was talking with Wolf Blitzer the other night. Isaac Herzog's father, Chaim Herzog, was from Ireland, and interestingly, Isaac Herzog speaks Hebrew. His nickname is Bougie. Bougie, that's his name. Isaac Herzog is the current president of Israel, and he speaks like an Israeli, speaking English. But his father, Chaim Herzog, spoke, and Chaim Herzog was the chief of staff of the military and was an Irish Jew whose own father was the chief rabbi of Ireland at one point. Spoke like an Irish person, but yeah, Bougie speaks more like it. And here's Conricus. This is the guy, Jonathan Conricus, that you see a lot. He's on the news all the time. And he's actually, like I said, he's from Sweden. So yeah, because I always wondered where he was from, and I looked it up, and I was like, because he's European, but I didn't like the fact that he was Swedish was just amazing. Yeah, Joanne. Oh, okay. Well, wait. Let's get to it then. Yeah, Phil.
Do you have any update on the USC professor?
Yeah, John Strauss. Oh, see, there's your question. Now, he didn't preface it with, it's not on that subject. No, of course it's on the subject. It's on the subject of Israel. And I will tell you that because I told some of you, yes, well, no, there was a hearing today, a pre-trial hearing for the Paul Kessler case.
Yeah, I'm talking about.
So I was there. No, I'll get to that. So, but I was down at Ventura today. I drove down there for the pre-trial hearing and I was there for 15 minutes. It was literally 15 minutes in the courthouse. But it took two hours of driving, but it was important for me to be there. And I didn't know how many people would be there. It turned out there's about 15 supporters of Israel who were there. People came with Israeli flags. There's a couple of people that came with signs. Needless to say, they wouldn't let us come in with the signs, didn't let us come in with our cell phones. A sheriff barked at me because I was going to take a picture of the murderer. I refer to him as the murderer, or you can call him the accused murderer. He's been accused officially. As he was coming in, and the sheriff yelled at me and said, "You're not allowed to take pictures." I told you that already. He said, "Nobody told me anything." She had told somebody else, but not this Jew. She didn't tell this Jew that they couldn't. But I was the only one wearing a yarmulke, I think. I think so. Anyways, but she told me to put away my camera because I wanted to take a picture of him going into the court. He only was there with he had his wife there and his attorney. There was nobody else there. But I thought it sent a good message that we were going to be there. And actually, while I was there, one other guy with the yarmulke walked in and a young guy sat on the other side of the court. But we were literally there for 15 minutes. Basically, just so everybody knows, there will not be another court hearing until February. So they basically came up with the schedule and they said February 22nd will be the first hearing on evidence. And they've still not, they said that was an open possibility for them to charge in a hate crime. The DA said that. I've not heard that. I can tell you, I was just telling Phil, I get the impression that his attorney is very competent. His attorney used to work in the DA's office. He ran for the DA. He didn't win, but he worked in the office for many years before he went into private practice. He knows what he's doing. He's not a schlub, his attorney. His attorney looked like he definitely had a command in the courtroom. And he's already said some stuff that's been pretty offensive, his attorney, but the accused murderer, he looked pretty circumspect. He wasn't smiling or goofy, he wasn't looking like that, but it was still hard to see him knowing that, he gets to go back home and, his bail was reduced from $1 million down to $50,000. So that was kind of frustrating, but and it was hard to see him without wanting to shout at him, but I didn't shout. There were a lot of sheriff's officers there, a lot. I think they were expecting more people. I think they were expecting, they wanted to be prepared in case there was any problems, but yeah, there was definitely a lot more sheriff's officers on that. We were on the second floor, so there was definitely a lot more people in that courtroom. But I think this is the judge. Philip was saying, and Philip's an attorney, so he knows that it's very possible that the attorney from the DA's office that was there will not be the DA, because I was a little concerned. She looked a little young, and I was a little worried that it wasn't the DA. It wasn't the DA that wasn't the main DA. I didn't expect it to be the DA, but I was a little concerned that she looked a little young. But Philip said it may not be the attorney that represents the state in this trial. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. He's saying that doesn't have to be the person, because I was a little taken aback. It didn't seem like they were taking this very seriously by putting a really young attorney on the case. But the judge, it does seem like he seems like he's going to be the judge, because he made a comment about how he's got a trial that's going on now that probably be going on for 2 months, which is why he said he didn't want to start this trial until February. So he basically was like, I want this trial. So he pretty much made it clear to them that he's going to be the judge. So I couldn't tell. He seemed like he was pretty, he was not that old. But yeah, I couldn't really tell whether he was taking it seriously. He definitely saw, 15 extra people in the court. There were otherwise would have been nobody, because this was just a pretrial. These were just pretrial scheduling things. So we thought there was supposed to be something again on Monday, another thing, but I guess it's not necessary. They agreed to move on to February. So that's that. And then regarding the John Strauss situation at USC, a lot of people heard that a professor at USC was barred, or it's difficult to know whether he's barred or was told, at least by the administration, not to come on campus for his own safety because of his pro-Israel comments. And so, yeah, that's your school, Dory. That everybody's got, listen, I saw a family from out here. I saw them this weekend. I just ran into them over at Old Town Junction with their daughter who went to Columbia. And the parents were like, we used to brag about our daughter going to Columbia. And she was sitting right there. And they were like, now we're embarrassed. I'm like, that's okay. She's not responsible for her whole university. But she said, look, it is embarrassing. And so now, again, USC hasn't fired the person. I want to make it clear. He hasn't been fired, but he's been told not to come on campus right now, which, again, I don't know how he's supposed to do his job if he can't come on campus. But definitely following that situation of what's going to happen with him, and as people saw the school in Hillcrest High School, that situation where a teacher essentially was, almost murdered by a mob, that these things are going on. She didn't say anything. She had posted pro-Israel comments on her social media, and that's, the kids found out and went, you didn't hear about it? Well, I'll just post it up real quick.
Rabbi,
people online have heard this, right? I mean, I'm not.
Yes.
Because this has caused a whole thing in New York school. The superintendent of the chancellor of New York schools came out and didn't defend the kids, but said they're not all here's the story.
I saw that.
I mean, this is,
Rabbi, I cannot believe this is happening. I just can't believe it.
This happened this week. Well, it happened last week, but the school chancellor came out this week saying that the kids who went crazy in the hallways were not all responsible. They've suspended some of the students, but they said the teacher was never in direct danger, he claimed. 2 days later, a student warned the principal that another demonstration was planned during 5th period at the school. Yeah, so this has become a kind of a political hot button issue now in New York. But I mean, if you see the video of what the kids did, which I think Fox posted, so I'll just show you real quick. I don't know. Let me make sure. Let me make sure I can do this. It's not working. But yeah, the video shows the kids. It shows the kids going crazy. It looks pretty scary to me, but this happened last week. No, that's not it. That's a commercial. Well, let's just give it a second, see if it loads up.
So if you're a veteran or service member, go to realtor.com/veterans to see if you qualify.
I'll just show you 2 seconds of this video. Well, they're not attacking the teacher. So the teacher was okay. That was a resource officer, one of the school policemen that the kids attacked. So the teacher didn't get attacked, but sure seemed like one of the school employees got attacked. So I think he's kind of splitting hairs here that the
Shouldn't you be expelled for attacking a resource officer at a public school?
I don't know what to tell you, Philip.
I mean,
He's splitting hairs. You heard what the guy said. He said the teacher wasn't in danger. Well, the resource officer surely seemed in danger. I mean, what kind of stupid comment is that? The teacher wasn't in danger? Of course, we didn't see a video of the teacher, but that's what they did to the police officer.
Stop protesting the way Palestinians have done and Hamas, but yet they don't come out and say, well, if you continue to do this, you're gonna be expelled. They don't do that.
Look, Joanne, I got bad news for you. If they had told the kids that they're going to be expelled for doing this, it still wouldn't have stopped them. You're thinking, okay, but I know, but you're thinking about it from in the terms of what logically should be the consequence to people who would, if you were the parent of the kid that got expelled, you'd go crazy. These are kids.
I'd be so embarrassed.
Of course you would be, but I don't think these parents care. So you're looking at it from the standpoint of, quite frankly, of a Jewish parent. You're looking at it from the standpoint of a Jewish parent, Joanne. I got to tell you. I understand. So that's why I'm saying I don't know what you do when you have a culture.
Well, you can't even get in trouble with it.
Yeah.
They just had like 3,000 cops resign in one day.
What?
Georgia just had 2,500 police officers resign. They're just like, this city sucks. Do anything.
Yeah, I don't think they did it one day though. Jesse. Really? Well, it's not good to see. It's not good to see what happens to a police officer at school. Anyways, somebody else was saying something online. Sorry. Somebody? Okay. Well, that's what's going on in the world right now, which is not a great picture of what's going on in the world. But in the meantime, we're doing what we can. We're going to announce our Krav Maga classes soon. We had 60 people that signed up, not just from our synagogue, from some of the other groups too. Yeah. 60 people responded with their times. And as we know, as we've announced, we're going to have a gun training, our first of our gun training and gun safety, firearm safety. We're going to have a flyer out in the next few days, but it will be on December the 11th, which is 2 weeks from now.
Here,
Just under 2 weeks, yeah, from here. Here, it's at 7 p.m. And you're hearing about it before the flyer even goes out, but the flyer will be out like in a day or so, I hope. So that is our
When's the first one?
December the 11th.
Okay.
Was he not there?
what time?
December 11th, John, 7 p.m. No,
Oh, what? No. I thought you meant Krav Maga. That's what I thought.
no, you're not paying attention. We're back to I added the gun. I said,
There's so many things
training.
happening. Come on, I can,
The
I've
gun
been
training,
focusing.
firearm training. Sorry,
That I
firearm
can-
training.
That I can focus
Firearm
on.
training, December 11th, 7 p.m. Yeah, we don't have the Krav Maga start date yet, but I think they're going to have it tomorrow. It's Thursday. So they said that by tomorrow they'll synthesize the times and tell people, and it is open to people of all ages. There'll be a kids group and an adults group. I mean, we already know that. We knew that before, but we just want to confirm it. Okay. So what did you call it? Krav. Quick draw McGraw. She said quick draw McGraw. She said it. It's Krav Maga, which it is hard to say. It is. I'm teasing Joanne, but it's Krav Maga is literally means contact fighting. Which kind of seems like a stupid phrase, but contact fighting is what it means literally in Hebrew. It means close fighting or contact. What? It's one class is going to be held here 1 day a week, and one of the options will be here, and then another option will be at Beth Shalom. So it'll be one class will be here and one class will be there. Anyways, so we're working on one's going to be on Sunday and one's going to be on Thursday. So I think that we're working on times and locations, setting that up. So it's very cool. And Dory, who's helping me with this, is actually a member of Chabad. So it's Chabad, Beth Shalom, and ourselves. We're all working together on scheduling this. It's a community-wide thing. And Dory was actually at the she was at the Ventura with me today. She drove out too.
Showed you about the video that you had showed us last Wednesday?
No, I showed it to you Tuesday. Yesterday.
No, Wednesday.
I didn't show you. I showed it yesterday, the video that really was bad. Well, they're both bad. One was bad because you had seen it before and it was Paul without being blurred out. That's what I showed last week. What I showed yesterday was somebody screaming further at Jews and Christians and whoever was standing on the corner, telling everybody they were going to hell, and they were, and that we're in the process. Yes, we're in the okay. I'm just going to put it in the chat so that people can open it up on their own right now. I mean, don't open it now, but I'm putting it in the chat. Yes. Yes, we're putting it up. We're putting it up. I don't want to put it up, okay? Because I don't want to, I like my head attached to my body. And I'm joking about that, but I'm actually not joking about that. So this is the kind of stuff that could actually get somebody hurt. So I don't want myself to be hurt. I don't want the synagogue to be hurt. I don't want anyone to be hurt. So that's why I am not posting the video under my auspices. And I will, right now I will,
I'll post it.
I will post the link as it exists right now. It's an unlisted link, and I will let people see it when they want to on their own time. I don't want JLTV to be, I don't want anybody I know to have problems with this. So I'm just going to put it in the chat, and people can look at it on their own time. And I'm not going to show it tonight because I showed it yesterday, and enough. It's enough. Yeah. So let me just do this real quick. I'm going to post it up, and you will it technically is on a JLTV unlisted link right now, but okay, 1 second. But the news agencies all have this. You know, I don't know if they wanted to not show it or didn't think that they should show it. I don't know. But here, this is the one video that I showed last week. And then this is the video of what happens after I call it the after video. This is after Paul has already been taken away by ambulance, and this maniac is still shouting. And what he shouts at this point is really disturbing, because it is it's just anti everybody who's not Muslim. So here you go. And now you have those two links.
Is that the real estate broker?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Mamdou El Alami, who's a real estate broker from Simi Valley. So, all right. So that, again, is for you to take a look at your own time. One of them 7 minutes and the other one's 5 minutes. All right. Anything else? No. Well, let us take a look back at the Torah then, because where we left off last week was, as I shared with you, one of my favorite lines in the whole Torah. Lo bashamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven. You don't have to have anybody say you don't understand it. It's not comprehensible. It's inside of you.
Rabbi,
It's in your
wait,
mouth.
Is this the last time God talked directly to humans?
No, no, because he talks to us as in the prophets, right?
Okay.
He talks to the people in the prophets, right? So Moses is definitely at a different level. But what's interesting about this is look, you know, whether this is Moses or whether it's God or whether it's somebody imagining that Moses would have said this, the important thing is that from a very early time, even according to the scholars who think that this was written rather late in the scheme of the Torah, which would have been 600 BCE, so 2,600 years ago, it still means that 2,600 years ago, the Jewish people said, God has put within us the ability to know and to make decisions and to have the guidance of the Torah to guide our lives. What's interesting though, it kind of following up on what Philip said, is that at least for the next few hundred years, God still spoke to prophets and gave them a message. We can make the argument that the reason that God still speaks to the prophets, and while he's not going to give them new laws, he definitely gives them kind of messages for the people, is that they essentially now have to kind of know. And again, the prophets started before. So if this was written right before the exile, if Deuteronomy was written during the time of King Josiah around 600, and Josiah's children and grandchildren were the kings during the time of the exile, even according to that theory, that means that they were overlapping with the prophets. That means they were, according to some people, this text was actually written by Jeremiah or Jeremiah's father or the people who lived at the time of the prophet Jeremiah. It means that, again, that people, at least at this point, still felt that if God has another message for us, it's that we're going to be exiled, but that we're going to be able to come out of the exile and we'll still be okay. And you can make the argument that they needed to hear that message because they didn't know for sure whether they would survive it. And the prophets say, and to some extent Deuteronomy also says, you will survive it. The reason that people think that Deuteronomy was written during this time is because it really starts to sound like the people who wrote Deuteronomy knew that the exile was inevitable, that it was going to happen, but they wrote it with the intention of telling the people, these laws will get us through this period of exile and will help us when we return. So it was pretty important. The idea that at least part of the Torah was composed during this time and then maybe edited as the people were coming back, that's the prevailing attitude on the theory of the documentary hypothesis, that people wrote it out of that exile experience, which makes sense because the theory kind of would be consistent with the idea that the people were going into exile, they needed to know what rules they were supposed to keep when they were in exile, and that the law code essentially was what kept them together, what kept us together for this experience, and then allowed us to come back to Israel and reestablish ourselves, so that the next time we were exiled 600 years later, could survive that too. We'd already done it. So by the time of the Roman exile 600 years later, people just said, we already did that. We've been there before. We can survive it. Of course, that exile would last for 2,000 years. So what we are left with is this, again, this message from the Torah itself, from the book of Deuteronomy. And we're about to get into this question, by the way. That's why I kind of brought it up, is what is going on in Deuteronomy? What is going on in this book? Because we're going to see some stuff today that kind of when some people would say is obvious that this is something special, that Deuteronomy was either the book that is being talked about in the book of Kings, or the book of Deuteronomy itself was thought of as the book that people were supposed to be reading, and maybe not the rest of the Torah was even imagined was going to be all together as one book. I know that's kind of crazy, but if you imagine that for a second, some of what we're reading now, which is this book is what you need, and what we're about to read. So after, that's what we finished with last week, was verse 14. It's in your heart and it's in your mouth. And then it's in your heart, it's in your mouth and it's in your heart. But then it continues. See, I set before you this day, I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. Life and prosperity, right? Hayim v'hatov, life and hatov, the good. Death and the bad. Okay? For I command you this day to love your God Adonai, to walk in God's ways and keep God's commandments, God's laws, God's rules, that you may thrive and increase, that Your God, Adonai, may bless you in the land that you are about to enter into and to possess. But if your heart turns away and you give no heed and are lured into the worship and service of other gods, I declare to you this day, again, Hayom, that you shall certainly perish. You shall not long endure on the soil that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. So, what's interesting here is that Moses, keep in mind that the book of all of what we've read at Deuteronomy from the very beginning has been taking place just before the Israelites are crossing over. So we kind of forget that because we spent the last 20 chapters enmeshed in laws and rules, but it began like that, which, by the way, leads some people to believe that there actually were two parts of Deuteronomy, maybe written separately, the laws and the rules, and then the ending and the beginning and the ending, which framed the book, which framed the laws and the rules. And now we're in the framing part again, the other part of it that we come back to at the end, which is you're about to enter into the land. If you don't follow these rules, you're going to get kicked out. And if it is written, according to the documentary hypothesis, if this part was written by people who knew that it was going to happen, that when he says this, when Moses says this, it's being told to an audience who's already knows that either exile is inevitable, it's happening, or it's already happened to some of the people. And essentially, we warned you about this a long time ago. And it's fulfilling this prophecy, this plan that Moses had, or God had, Moses told you about. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. Hashamayim ve'etaaretz. Right? I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life if you and your offspring would live. Right? So choose life. Very famous line. Very famous, not even line, 2 words. Choose life. And some people say that that's the message of the Torah. It's just encapsulated here in this one line, this discussion about what to do with, these choices that you have. Choose life. And this is the message of Judaism. One could say that's one of the differences between Judaism and other faiths. This idea that the choices we make are life-affirming choices. It'd be the motto of Judaism, choose life. Now look at this phrase. This is the last phrase or the last line in the chapter, at least according to the way the scholars laid it out. But I don't think it's a bad place to break. Lahava, love, right? By loving your God, Adonai, heeding God's commandments, and holding fast to God, for thereby you shall have life and shall long endure upon the soil that Adonai swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them. So, again, the phrase to love, ve'ahavta, we have. Lishmoa, to listen, to hear, right? It doesn't exactly translate it that way. It says heeding, which is in literally listening to or hearing God's command. And again, holding fast to God is life. Yeah, a long life. And most importantly, a long life in the land. As one could argue, you may or may not have a long life, but your family, your people, your nation will have a long life in the land. So that's the end of the chapter. And interestingly, that is the end of the Parsha. So that is the end of the portion that's Netzavim, which is to some extent actually the last sensical portion of the Torah, of the weekly Torah reading. And by that I mean it's not long. We started reading it and has that Atem Netzavim Hayom. It begins with that phrase, you stand here in front of us, right? And it starts, Netzavim starts in chapter in 29, verse 9, right? So there's 29:9. And then at the end of chapter 30, that's the end of Netzavim. It goes to here. Or sorry, it goes to right here. But here's the weird thing. The rest of the portions of Deuteronomy are even shorter. So that one's like 2 chapters, or, like 29 and 30, most of 29 and 30. Vayelech, right? Vayelech is chapter 31. That's the end. Chapter 32 is Ha'azinu. Ha'azinu is chapter 32. And then chapter 33 is Vazot HaBracha. So the last couple of chapters of the Torah, right? The last couple parshas are like 1 chapter. They're very, very short. Vazot HaBracha is the last one, and we don't even read that over a full week. That's what we read the week of Simchat Torah. And Vazot HaBracha begins in chapter 33. I mean, obviously we're going to read this. We'll read this next week probably. But chapter 33 is 29 verses. And there is a chapter 34, which is the last chapter of the Torah, the last chapter of Deuteronomy, but it's only 12 verses. So all of Vazot HaBracha, the whole thing is, you see, it's 41 verses, the last chapter. So the last parshiot, the last Torah portions are super, super short. The reason, quite frankly, is that during the last weeks of the Torah reading, we're reading, it's during Sukkot. And it's during Yom Kippur. And so, like, in between those times, we're finishing up the Torah. But Ha'azinu, we always read right around the time of, we read it always right around the time of Rosh Hashanah. So we'll read Ha'azinu probably. I don't know that we'll get to Ha'azinu today, but I wanted to show you what happens in these last chapters. We're going to finish next week. It's a surprise. No, it's not a surprise. You know what we're doing. I'll talk about it in a second. So here's Vayelech, which literally is the first word of the chapter, the first word of the portion. Vayelech says, and Moses went, and Vayelech is he went. And the next word, Vayedaber, and he spoke these things to all Israel. So this makes sense that this is a beginning of a chapter, maybe again, as it says, as we see it, the beginning of a parsha. Now Moses steps back into, let me tell you a story, which is why I say a little bit in the last chapter, and definitely more in these last chapters, these last couple of chapters, Moses frames the story again, reminds us that he's telling the story. So whether that was a separate writer taking the bulk of that code or whatever, but now we really feel this story come full circle, the story that Deuteronomy is Moses' message. Because look what he says. He spoke to the people, right? He said to them, I'm now 120 years old. I can no longer be active. Moreover, Adonai has said to me, you shall not go across yonder Jordan, which is kind of we never see the word yonder, but it means to pass over, right? To pass over the Jordan, right? Ta'avoret hayarden, you shall not cross over the Jordan, yonder Jordan. He's 120. Now, he says, I can no longer be active. Okay, well, he can say that all he wants. He seems like he didn't want to stop, which is kind of implied by the next line, which is, moreover, God's told me you're not going over the Jordan. So even if I wanted to do it, God's not letting me do it. And so Moses is now, again, reiterating or stating that so that lest you think this is just my choice, it's not my choice, it's God. God has retired me. And so that is his view, at least the way Deuteronomy presents it. This is his view of what happens. It is indeed your God Adonai who will cross over before you and who will wipe out those nations from your path, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua is the one who shall cross over before you, as Adonai has spoken. And so there, very clearly, he says Joshua is now in charge. Now, even though Joshua is in charge, he's the leader, it's God who's doing it. Joshua is not doing it, just like I didn't do it. It's God who's doing it. And he makes it very clear to them, don't say it's Joshua, it's God. God is doing this. And Joshua is the one that God chose. I didn't choose him. God chose him. It's not up to me. You listen to him because God chose him. Adonai will do to them, meaning the Canaanites in the land of Israel, as was done to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, and to their countries when God wiped them out. That was all what we read about in Numbers, defeating the Canaanites who lived on the other side of the Jordan River. As I pointed out to you, and as we've said and we've discussed, and I'll repeat it again, the Jordan River was never a boundary between countries, ever. Not in Roman times, not in Judean times, not in Turkish times, and not really in British times either. It was never a military political border. Why? Because it's not significant enough of a geographical deterrent to stop any countries from going back and forth. So during this time, Israel had control over both sides of the Jordan River. Very clear. It says so. Later on, sometimes Israel had control over it. Sometimes the Edomites had control over it, meaning even onto our side, the Edomites sometimes made incursions onto the Judean side. So the river never was a boundary between these countries. 2.5, that's right. 2.5 tribes stayed there. And when the 2.5 tribes were there, they were still bound together in the confederation of the tribes. They were the same as the tribes on the other side of the Jordan River, on the Israel side. Philip.
Yeah, when we were in Israel in February, when we went to the Jordan River, where John the Baptist was supposed to have been, what shocked me the most was how insignificant that river was.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, it was bigger during the times of Joshua and Moses, but it still wasn't that significant. It wasn't that big. Correct.
I mean,
So that's why it was not a political border. Couldn't function as a political border because it couldn't keep anybody out. There was no need to have ferries going across. So it was not a river that you could say, and there's places that are even, that place was even deeper than some of the places that you can cross. And there were fords, it says over and over again, there were fords over the Jordan River at Yabok. The Bible speaks of the book of Judges. There were wars, there were things that were going on where people ran from one side of the Jordan to the other. It never was a border because it was never a boundary that was significant enough to keep one country out or another, one country from having to stop anybody. So you've seen it with your own eyes, you know it. And the Bible over and over again tells it. So they did not, it was further away, but those parts of the tribes were part of the tribes. I don't know what to say. Adonai will deliver them up to you, right? And you shall deal with them in full accordance with the instructions that I have enjoined upon you, which is to destroy them. Now, as we know, they didn't destroy them, but here it pretty much says, I've told you to destroy them. And of course, you didn't. Now, here's a wonderful line for all of us today. This is a phrase that we have in other parts of the Torah. We have it in the book of Joshua. It's been quoted in its kind of more, it's shorter form in Joshua. Here it is. Be strong and resolute. Be not in fear or in dread of them, for it is indeed your God Adonai who marches with you. God will not fail you or forsake you. And that's the phrase. Hizku ve'imtzu. But in Hebrew, in Israel, we usually say the words chazak va'amatz. Be strong and resolute. Be strong and courageous. However you want to translate it. It is a phrase that is used, and I'll show you some of the places that you could see. Chazak va'amatz. Well, here is one of the more famous places, or again, times when it's been used. Let me just show you. Actually, there are people who have put it on. Actually, I've never seen it on a Jewish person, but I have seen the tattoo on Christians. Actually, there was a football player recently, Christian football player, that had it tattooed on their arm. Here's one of the tattoos that I saw that somebody tattooed on their arms. A couple times I've seen it on football players, and I've been kind of amazed at it. People did it because you think that they're Jewish when they put it on, and again, some people do it. Some Christians do it. Here's people who've done it with a cross, but yeah, people like the phrase because we use it, and we've been using it a lot lately. In Israel, they've been using it, and you'll see it on posters, and you'll see it on banners all around Israel right now. Chazak va'amatz. So it's a phrase that we use the phrase chazak v'nit chazek, right, when we finish a chapter, a book of the Torah. But chazak va'amatz is more. Chazak v'nit chazek means be strong, and let us all be strengthened. But chazak va'amatz has a little bit more of a it has a little bit more of a military, I don't say military, but more of what you'd say going into combat. I will tell you one thing. This was funny. This is a true story. It was in BuzzFeed, but it was really true. The guy thought he was getting the word amatz tattooed on his arm. He wasn't. One second. The guy wasn't Jewish. He wanted a Hebrew tattoo. So he wanted the word strength tattooed on him. So this guy from Israel ran into the guy. He saw his tattoo and he said, "Oh, that's really cool. You have a tattoo in Hebrew." But the guy had the wrong word tattooed on him. Instead of the word amatz tattooed, went away. He had the word matzah tattooed on him instead. That's very close, but he has the word matzah tattooed on his arm instead of amatz. So there's the tattoo, and that clearly reads matzah. So I don't, but he has the word matzah. He thought he had the word resolute tattooed on himself, and he said the word matzah. I have a cracker tattooed on my arm. But yeah, unfortunately, the guy found out the hard way that he had the wrong word. Yeah, true story. Only in America, only in the United States can that happen. We have a story like that. So anyways, it's a great phrase. Chazak va'amatz, be strong and resolute. And of course, al tira, or al tiru in this case, don't be afraid. Al tira. So don't be afraid. So it says that Moses then called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and resolute, right? And there it is in the phrase that we like, chazak va'amatz. So 31:6, it says, chizku v'imtzu, for everybody, for one person, it's chazak va'amatz, right? So it's usually used in that phrase rather than for everybody, but it's to you, you be strong and resolute. For it is you who shall go with this people into the land that Adonai swore to their fathers to give them, and it is you who shall apportion it to them. So the people have to be strong and resolute, and Joshua has to be strong and resolute because he's going to be dealing with them. And it is indeed Adonai who will go before you. God will be with you and will not fail you or forsake you. Fear not and be not dismayed. And there's the phrase again. There it's lo tira, lo techat. Don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. And now here's an interesting little, if you will, story about the story. Moses wrote down this teaching and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of Adonai's covenant, and to all the elders of Israel. So according to the book of Deuteronomy, Moses wrote down this scroll. That's how it wound up with the people. It makes sense other than the fact that they're not done writing the scroll. Can't be exactly this scroll because he didn't write it yet. Maybe. So there's no issue with, like, what do the traditional people say about this, right? Well, Moses was writing the scroll. Well, was he writing every scroll? Was he writing all 5 books, or was he just writing this one? Now, of course, according to the traditional teaching, he was writing everything, all the way from Genesis all the way to here. So what did he do with the last couple chapters? Well, he didn't write it. And maybe Joshua will finish the last couple chapters. Or no, well, that's the logical thing will tell you that Joshua, right, wrote the last chapter when Moses was gone, or dying. There is a midrash. There's an explanation that the last couple of chapters Moses wrote exactly as God told him to write. God dictated to him what was going to happen. And there's a midrash that God told Moses what was going to happen to him, that he was going to die, but that he would be buried by him. And that Moses wrote down his own death. And the midrash states that the ink was mixed with his own tears. Pretty powerful. The guy had to write about his own death. But again, there's another understanding that Joshua wrote the last couple of words. Like from here on, Moses is done writing it. Well, it seems like he's done writing it because it just said he wrote down this teaching and gave it to the priests. Now, again, it's very possible that Deuteronomy itself, or at least the law code of Deuteronomy that starts in chapter 12 and pretty much goes down through chapter 26, was an older book. That the writers of the rest of Deuteronomy, the ones who wrote chapters 1 through 11 and chapters 23, or let's even say 29 from Netzavim, if the blessing and curses were written by that same author, or maybe that's a different author, but the first 11 chapters and the last 3 chapters were written by somebody else who had no issue writing those words, because the bulk of Deuteronomy, at least according to them, was written by Moses. At least the important parts of Deuteronomy, which were the laws, the teaching, the Torah, that's what it says. Vayikov Moshe et haTorah hazot. this Torah. That's what the words literally mean. That's why they wrote down this teaching with a capital T. It's the words. By Tov, Moses wrote down HaTorah Hazot. And again, according to this, essentially that scroll would have been placed with the ark, in the ark with next to the Ten Commandments. Now, check this out. It's not just that he wrote it. Moses instructed them as follows. Every seventh year, the year set for remission at the Feast of Booths, which we know as Hag HaSukkot, which we just celebrated 7 weeks ago, when all Israel comes to appear before your God Adonai in the place that God will choose, Jerusalem, you shall read this teaching aloud in the presence of all Israel. It's just said, HaTorah Hazot. Again, you're supposed to read this whole book on Sukkot, or the laws that existed from chapter 12 all the way down to here, or just before here. Look, when the Torah says Lo Bashamayim Hi, the Torah is not in heaven, that part didn't necessarily have to be in Moses's laws. It's an explanation almost for the fact that it's what we just heard. It's all the law that you just heard. So the code, the law code that's in Deuteronomy, seems to be what they're most concerned about. Every 7 years, did the guy have to get, according to this, right? You read this teaching. Remember, this is the same thing that the Deuteronomy says the king has this teaching. Did the guy have to come up every 7 years and read this? Maybe, but maybe he had to just read the law code. Maybe he just had to read through the blessings and curses, the law code. That makes sense. That's 14 chapters of the Torah. Could be read in about 45 minutes. Makes sense to me. It also doesn't make sense to me that he necessarily had to read the narrative pieces to this. But maybe, I don't know. I mean, maybe they did. But it definitely seems like he read something. And something that would have, again, allowed the people every 7 years to remember that they're in a holy covenant, a holy community where they had to hear. Can you imagine if every 7 years, every American had to hear the Constitution?
Be a good thing.
Right? But by the way, do you think they'd read the whole Constitution, or do you think they'd read the Bill of Rights? It's a good question, right?
Mhm.
Would they read the Bill of Rights, or would they read the whole Constitution? Would they say, well, you know, the ways of the powers of the government are split up. Hey, we're not going to go through all those sections. Maybe they'd read the preamble. I don't know, but they should do something like that. Yeah, Philip.
When I read that, it really struck me, because I read it for the first time. The Torah is not in heaven.
Yeah.
It was saying to me, and I'm trying to still wrap my head around it, that God is saying, I've given you the laws, I've given you the instructions on how to live. You don't have to ask me anymore.
Yeah. Yes.
Kinda like I'm moving away from that.
Yes. And it's also, again, at a certain point, when a parent says to a kid, I'm not bailing you out anymore. You know what you're supposed to do. You're an adult. You have the rules.
I mean, that's the
You've
way I
graduated
see it.
college. I've educated you. I've made sure you're educated, made sure you have a career. I've made sure I've gotten you this far. You're going to have to do this on your own now.
In my world, I said that God was saying to the Jewish people, well, you've now reached the age of majority.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really what I think happens in Deuteronomy is that God and Moses say, you've grown up. You got to do this by yourself. And you're not by yourself, but you have the rules. You don't need me to interfere anymore. You don't need me to bail you out anymore, which essentially, again, is this understanding of like, why does God not interfere anymore? Because we don't need to be interfered with anymore. We know what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to choose life. So again, every 7 years, you hear these rules, you listen to them again. You make sure you're following the rules, which include, as it says, the year of remission, right? It says right here, this is the year of the Shemitah. This is the year when the land is going to, lay fallow. It's when we're going to let people get out of their debts, right? The year of their, yeah. It's the Sukkot of that year. So look, the people had a ritual, a national ritual of covenanting. Every 7 years, they again, another 7 years have passed. We bring everybody together and we read this teaching out loud. So again, in addition to, you think about the people being bound together by rituals like sacrifices and the holidays and everything else, there's a covenanting, there's a connection to the rules, to the laws that the people have to affirm. They have to literally be a part of that, which essentially is almost like recreating the covenant at Mount Sinai and the covenant that we read about as they came into the land, or what they're supposed to do when they come into the land. As we read Kitavo, that Moses says, this is what you do when you come into the land. You make your sacrifices and you remind yourselves that you were a people that wandered, came out of Egypt. And you also do this when you come into the land, you're going to get on Mount Gerizim. We read about this a couple of weeks ago. You get on Mount Gerizim, you get on Mount Ebal, and you shout out the blessings and curses and make sure everybody knows when they come into the land what they're bound to and what they have to do. And then they put those laws on the plaster. Again, this is always supposed to be before you. These rules, these laws. The tefillin represent that. The mezuzah represents that. All of this represents the fact that these laws, this code is so important. So, does it make sense? Sure. It makes sense that they read the book of Deuteronomy. It doesn't really make sense that they sat and read the entire Bible or the entire Torah from Genesis to Deuteronomy. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. But I'm just saying, for those who say that when it says this Torah, can't be the whole Torah. It just doesn't make sense. Nobody says it is. I shouldn't say nobody says it is. There are people who say when it says the Torah, it means the whole Torah. But I think most people rationally think that they read the book of Deuteronomy or a big chunk of the book of Deuteronomy, right? And when you read it, you gather the people, the men and women, and the children, everybody, and the strangers in your communities. So also the people that are not Jewish, that are not Israelites. Ger, the stranger, they come and listen to it too, that they may hear and so learn to revere your God Adonai and to observe faithfully every word of this teaching. Right? This is where the mitzvot are. And that's why when we went through Ki Tetzei, I told you that 70 commandments in that Torah portion, that one Torah portion. A lot of commandments. There's a lot of commandments in there. It's not like, well, I have to learn all the commandments. What? There's not 613. But of the commandments, of those 613 commandments, how many are in the book of Deuteronomy? Good question. Let me tell you. No. It's very simple. No, I used to remember. I've forgotten already. How many commandments how many of the 613 are in Deuteronomy? A huge chunk, I think. And by the way, no, I don't know all of them. I know, off the top of my head, but I will tell you that of the ones that we can keep, because remember, a whole lot of them are in the book of Leviticus that deal with sacrifice. We can't even do them anymore. So of the 613, how many are in Deuteronomy? So let me see how many. No, that's stupid. Yes, the 10 commandments are in the they're mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy. Of course, they're also in the book of Exodus. No, not exactly. But let's see. Of the 613, again, how many are in Genesis? None, or really one, which is the circumcision, the commandment of circumcision. Some people say the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. Other people say that's not a commandment. So there's 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. I mean, ones you're not, things you're not supposed to do. I'm looking for the total by book. Let me just see if it's in here. Somebody I know I've seen it before. By book. No, don't stop that. That's too. So, yeah, this is one. There's different versions of it, but you can see these are all in Leviticus. And then we get into it, but I'm sure it is somewhere here where there's
I found 199,
in Deuteronomy.
correct.
Very good, Harvey. So that means 1/3 of the commandments are in 1/3 of them are in Deuteronomy. And probably there's about another 100 and some, probably about 100 in Leviticus. And most of the ones in Leviticus we can't keep. So that's not all of them in Leviticus we can't keep. I mean, ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, that's one we're supposed to keep. Don't put stumbling blocks in front of the blind. That's from Leviticus. That's one we can keep. But obviously there's a lot of laws about the sacrifices that we can't keep. So everybody is supposed to hear these laws. Everyone is supposed to be accountable to them, including the people that aren't your citizens. That's pretty important. I don't want to get political, but that's pretty important. That's at least according to what we valued for thousands and thousands of years, that the people who live amongst you are also responsible for keeping the commandments, keeping the laws. Their children too, who have not had the experience, shall hear and learn and revere God Adonai as long as they live in the land that you are about to cross the Jordan to possess. So even though your children, right? Your children and your children's children, their children, your grandchildren, right? They're not going to hear directly from me. They're not going to hear it directly from you, but they need to know these rules too. They need to revere God. And here we have again, Adonai said to Moses, the time is drawing near for you to die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tent of meeting, that I may instruct him. Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tent of meeting. And Adonai appeared in the tent in a pillar of cloud, the pillar of cloud having come to rest at the entrance of the tent. So Moses and Joshua are there together. All right. Joshua is supposed to take over, but at this moment, there's kind of like a passing of the torch, changing of the guard. They're both there together for this moment. Adonai said to Moses, you are soon to lie with your ancestors. This people will thereupon go astray after the alien gods in their midst. In the land that they are about to enter, they will forsake me and break my covenant that I made with them. He tells them they're going to lose it. They're going to lose it. Now, Moses is hearing this from God, and this is, of course, this is not news that he wants to hear. To some extent, God says, look, you're not going to be there. I'm not sure what's he supposed to do with that information, because he basically is saying, you're not there, you're not going to help them anymore, and they're going to do bad stuff. Every time you turn your back on them, they do bad stuff. So you can imagine once you're not here, they're going to do bad stuff again. Right? So that's what's going to happen. They will forsake me and break my covenant. And here's the kicker. Then my anger will flare up against them, and I will abandon them and hide my countenance from them. They shall be ready prey, and many evils and troubles shall befall them. And they shall say on that day, surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these evils have befallen us. So he tells Moses is hearing directly from God. This bad stuff is going to happen, right? The people are going to see it right here. The people are going to say that God's left us. God's given up on us. He's being told what's going to, of course, we're being told what's going to happen. Yet I will keep my countenance hidden on that day because of all the evil they have done in turning to other gods. Therefore, write this poem and teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths in order that this poem may be my witness against the people of Israel. So, you can think the message here is going to be, well, I'm still with them, and it's going to be all okay for them once they're punished. That's what the prophets do. That's why we're reading Ezekiel. Because Ezekiel, as we read yesterday, because we got to chapter 33 and we read about how Ezekiel has already been in exile. He's already suffered exile, but Jerusalem hasn't been destroyed yet. And then he has a messenger that comes to his town in Babylonia and says to him, it's happened. Jerusalem has fallen. So now this has happened. Now this has happened. And so now the people have to figure out, okay, so what do we do now? How do we keep it together? If they believe that this was part of the plan, then part of the plan can also be we can get through it. Because we were warned, we messed up, but God must still have a plan for us. And it's the audacity of the Jewish people at that moment to believe that God still had a plan for us, which is why we're still here. Because every other people up till that period of time, and most of the people since that time, once they got exiled, they never existed anymore. We're the first people, and still one of the few people, that decided that we were not going to stop being a people just because we lost our country. So it's the audacity of that moment where essentially they said, okay, fine, we're responsible. We did this. We were warned. We've been warned for hundreds of years. We understand, but God isn't done with us. So God says, keep this poem down. When I bring them into a land flowing with milk and honey that I promised on oath to their fathers, they eat their fill and grow fat and turn to other gods and serve them, spurning me and breaking my covenant, and the many evils and troubles befall them, then this poem shall confront them as a witness, since it will never be lost from the mouth of their offspring. For I know what plans they are devising even now, before I bring them into the land that I promised on oath. So he says, God says to Moses, look, these people are already planning this. They're already turning. They're already worshiping other gods. They want to worship other gods. They're going to do it, and I know they're going to do it. And this poem that we're about to get to is the testimony. That day, Moses wrote down this poem and taught it to the Israelites. And God charged Joshua, son of Nun, be strong and resolute. There's the line again, chazak v'amatz, for you shall bring the Israelites into the land that I promised them on oath, and I will be with you. When Moses put down in writing the words of this teaching to the very end, Moses charged the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of Adonai, saying, take this book of teaching it and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of your God Adonai, and let it remain there as a witness against you. So again, we're almost at the end. We're almost at the poem. But the poem, the setup for the poem, it's almost as if, like the poem that we're about to read, Ha'azinu, was in addition to the Torah that, that he's putting into the Ark of the Covenant. But he definitely wanted the poem to be known, because he said, right, teach this poem, write this poem and teach it to them, because the poem is going to essentially be a warning to you. So the poem has a role to play too, which is why Ha'azinu is such a important, and actually is a portion by itself. Ha'azinu is that poem. And it's again almost like it's the coda, or it's the delicious topping on the laws that they have already had. But it's another warning. So they got the blessings and curses, and now they're getting a poem or a song. You get kind of different translations for that. Sometimes it'll say poem, and sometimes it'll be a song. The Hebrew word for it is shirah. We don't know for sure whether it was a poem, whether it had a melody to it, or whether it was a written down or composed to be read like as a text. But that's the phrase. So it's something that they had to have too. So the teaching, the Torah, is put with the Ark of the Covenant, right? And Moses says, in the last part of this, to some extent, the last part of what Moses will say to the people before the poem, which is not his poem, it's God's poem, where it's at least God's warning poem. Well, I know how defiant and stiff-necked you are. Even now, while I'm still alive in your midst, you have been defiant toward Adonai. How much more then when I am dead? Gather to me all the elders of your tribes, your officials, that I may speak to them all these words, right? That I may call upon heaven and earth to witness against them, which is that phrase. Let them hear in their ears, right? That's literally the words, be'oznehem. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, the heaven and the earth. For I know that when I'm dead, you will act wickedly and turn away from the path that I enjoined upon you. And that in time to come, misfortune will befall you for having done evil in the sight of Adonai, whom you vexed by your deeds. And then Moses recited the words of this poem to the very end, in the hearing of the whole congregation of Israel. Now, Ha'azinu is the poem. To some extent, the setup or the narrative for the poem ends right there. And then the poem begins here. Now, again, we didn't, chapter and verse, the setup for this, as I said, those 30 verses, that's a whole Torah portion. That's Vayelech. That's the whole portion. That's a whole portion. Now, again, we very rarely read that as a separate portion. Vayelech is oftentimes read within the previous portion. That's Avim. So 29, 30, and 31 will be read as one portion. And it's still a short portion, but it's oftentimes read together as a double portion. There are years where Netzavim and Vayelech are separate. And so when they're separated, it's a very short portion. It's 30 verses. This is the easiest Torah portion. If you have to read the whole portion, this is only 30 lines. That's the whole portion. And so it ends with this. It ends with, and this is the poem. But then the poem's in the next chapter. So Ha'azinu is always read as a separate portion. It's always read It's always read at the time of Rosh Hashanah. This year it was read the weekend of. This year it was read on. It was read September 23rd, Shabbat Shuvah. So it's always, again, read during the high holiday period. As you can imagine, it's a very difficult thing to process, because what do we have to read? We have to read this terrible portion of a poem or a song that is fairly scary, which is, you guys are going to screw up, right? Ha'azinu is read, as I said, always at the same time. It's a strange portion because, again, it's a poem, right? And I will show you the way it's written in the Torah, how it looks in the Torah, because it's read, it's always one of those Torah portions that when you look at it, that's what it looks like. It's 2 columns. Right? So it's weird because if you look at it, it's clearly written as a poem and was written so that you can see it in the Torah, so that you could see the so that you could see you could see you could see that you could see the poem kind of laid out next to it itself. What was a interesting thing to share with you? This is the Torah portion that was read the week of September 11th, 2001. This was the Torah portion that was the weekly Parsha. So, look, I don't believe in Bible codes, and I don't have a lot of explanation for why things are the way they are. That one was one of the strangest Bible, whatever you want to call it, coincidences, was that was what we looked at when we looked at the Torah that week. How do you look at that and not think of the Twin Towers? And how do you look at that and not just like, it just hits you? So that's history, folks. So we already know that this poem, by the setup, is a warning. It's a warning to the people. And it's Moses now using every tactic he has to hopefully guide the people and warn them, and and this is the poem, this is the song. And you can see how it's written in here so that you can see the two. I mean, they didn't columnize it, but it's set up so you can see this is in the Torah, this is the space that exists between the 2 columns. And it's been written like that, by the way, in the Torah for 2,000 years. I mean, it's not like we started writing that, last week. It's been written like that for 2,000 years with these columns. Give ear, O heavens. And again, it's to show the poem, the poetic structure. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words that I utter. And again, this is set up in a biblical doublet, so that the biblical poetry style is repeating using synonyms from one line, the first line to the second line is the same, has the same point. So it's using lots of synonyms. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words that I utter, right? The heavens and the earth are the Hashemayim va'aretz we just read before in the previous verse. The heavens and the earth, or be my witness. Here he says, let me speak, let me utter, right? Adabara imre fi. Let me speak, let me utter. It's the same, you see that. So I'm not gonna do that every time. You can, if it sounds redundant or repetitive, that's biblical poetry. May my discourse come down as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. So far, it's pretty nice. Pretty, a lot of nature images. For the name of Adonai I proclaim, give glory to our God. The rock, whose deeds are perfect, yea, all God's ways are just. A faithful God, never false, true and upright indeed. Tzaddik v'yashar hu. It's a famous phrase that we use to describe God. Tzaddik v'yashar. Unworthy children, and here's where it starts to get bad. That crooked, perverse generation, their baseness has played God false. Do you thus requite Adonai? O dull and witless people, is not this the Father who created you, fashioned you, and made you endure? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of ages past. Ask your parent, who will inform you, your elders, who will tell you. When the Most High gave nations their homes and set the divisions of humanity, God fixed the boundaries of the peoples in relation to Israel's numbers. So, interestingly here, the Bible sees that our place on the earth was picked by God. God picked everybody's place, and God picked our place. It doesn't say that people don't have a place. It says everybody has a place. Our place happens to be there. That's where God planned it. So if the Canaanites were there, by the way, that implies that they're not supposed to be there. Now, we don't think about that a lot because we don't think about it. But the Canaanites, at least according to our understanding, were never supposed to be where they were. They weren't supposed to be there. And it seems like God is okay with it to a certain point until God says, no, I can't tolerate them there. But it still seems to be like, well, when God promised it to Abraham, there were already Canaanites there. And God was to some extent saying, this is your land. This is where you're supposed to be, which is a weird idea because it implies that it's not just that the Canaanites were not supposed to be there or had given up their time to be there, but they were never supposed to be there. And that's kind of based on the Torah in that the Canaanites are descendants of Ham, who's in Africa, who's an Egyptian, or the ancestor of the Egyptians, and they're supposed to be there. The Canaanites, if they're Hamites, are not supposed to be in the land of Israel. They've already kind of crossed into an area where they weren't supposed to be. So, God gave everybody their homes. It's one of the things God did. God picked these places. Now, for Adonai's portion is this people. Jacob, God's own allotment. God found them in a desert region in an empty, howling waste. God girded them, watched over them, guarded them as the pupil of God's eye. Which means when they were in Egypt, they were not where they were supposed to be. He found them in a desert region. Now, we know how we got there. The Bible's told us even in the book of Deuteronomy how we got there. But this idea that we were not supposed to be where we were, God where God has a special place for us. And then it says, like an eagle who rouses its nestlings. There's your eagle, like gliding down to its young. So did God spread wings and take them, bear them along on pinions, right? So God took them like an eagle takes its babies. Adonai alone did guide them, no alien God alongside. Well, that's weird. Was there supposed to be another God? Well, there wasn't. There was no other God. But that also seems to imply that there might be another God. There was no other God there at the time. I don't know. You can read into it lots of things. But the simple answer here is that God did it. And only God did it. Nobody else did it. So it says Adonai, which is the Yud-He Vav-He name, which is why it's not even translated, right? It just says Adonai. And for God is the word El, which is why it's lowercase. Because El Nechar is a alien God. It's a foreign God. God set them atop the highlands to feast on the yield of the earth, nursing them with honey from the crag and oil from the flinty rock. That's not supposed to happen. Honey's not supposed to come out of a rock. Oil's not supposed to come out of a rock. The word Sela translates as crag. It's a rock. It's a stone. What does yours say, Mary, for Sela? Doesn't say. Yeah. Because Sela is not really a crag. I don't know why they translated it. It's a rock. And a tsur is also a rock. Well, they translate it as halamish tsur, which is like, kind of a rock, but it's a rock. They're both rocks. But you're not supposed to get anything like that from a rock. You're not supposed to get honey and oil from rocks. But God took it out. God gave us these foods, and gave us life out of the earth. So God took us like a eagle. God nurtured us and took care of us like a animal nursing. Ooh, John, you got your audio there. It's a very parental relationship, and in this case almost like an animal protecting its young, and again taking care of us in a miraculous way. Herd of kine and milk of flocks. Yeah, that's fine. But the best of lambs, best of lambs, and rams of Bashan and he goats, with the very finest wheat, and foaming grape blood was your drink. It's poetic, but grapes don't have blood. But it says dam enav. It literally says the blood of a grape, but clearly they're talking about grape juice or wine, right? But God gave us these great things. What does your translation say for verse 14, Mary? Yeah, does it say curds? Yeah, so that's what we would normally call chemat. Chemat is butter. I don't know why they use curd. I think they used it because it's poetic. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. So they went with the translation of dam enav being blood of grape, but I mean, that's what it literally says, but it's grape juice. But it compares it to like blood, because sometimes it looks a little bit like blood, but it is all life force and beautiful things. Beautiful foods that we got to have in the land of Israel. We got honey, oil, and meat, and wheat, and butter, just great stuff. Got all this good stuff in the land. We haven't gotten it yet. He hasn't taken the people in yet. Right? Here it seems like it's already happened. Okay, fine. I mean, it's going to happen, but here it seems like it's happened. So, Yeshurun, which is another nickname for Israel, which is why we have synagogues named Yeshurun. Not a lot, but we don't have too many in LA. I think there's one in San Diego that's a Yeshurun. It means literally the upright. It's another word for Israel or for the Jews, Yeshurun. We have, there's a synagogue in Minnesota, Dot Jeshurun. There's B'nai Jeshurun in New York, which is on the Upper West Side, which has become a very popular and big synagogue in the last 30 years. It's kind of a dying synagogue, and then it came back, B'nai Jeshurun. So there are synagogues, not so much I'm thinking about it in LA. There's not a lot of synagogues that have just Jeshurun or Yeshurun in its name. I'm trying to think if there's any. I can't think of one. I think there was one in San Diego years ago that was something Jeshurun. But it's another nickname for Israel, and it's one that, poetically people used. Let me just see if there was, where the one in San Diego was, because it's bugging me, because I know there was one. Yeah, Adat Yeshurun. It's an Orthodox synagogue in La Jolla. It's a modern Orthodox synagogue. Adat Yeshurun. It's over by the mall, over by La Jolla Scenic Drive. So can't think of any in this area. But it is used here. Deuteronomy is a name for us. So we grew fat and kicked. You grew fat and gross and coarse. They forsook the God who made them and spurned the rock of their support. They incensed God with alien things, vexed God with abominations. They sacrificed to demons, no gods they had never known, new ones who came about lately, who stirred not your forebears' fears. People sacrificing to other gods, even gods that they didn't know, new gods, Johnny-come-lately gods that people just picked up and ran with. I don't know. God seems to be more upset with those ones, but yeah, these are gods that they never knew about, and now they have no reason to be attached to God, and yet they have these relationships with these gods. So, this translation of demons probably is not a good translation. He probably is in the King James too, though, right? Shadim is demons. Yeah, pretty much the same thing. It's probably not a good translation. Now that we know more about the word for where Shadim come from, where the word Shadim comes from, it probably they were gods that people in the area of Israel worship. Canaanites and other people in the area worship Shadim. Why? Because demons doesn't really make sense in this list, because everything else that's mentioned here are Elohim meaning, again, gods, what lowercase g. It's only capitalized because it's the beginning of the sentence, but no gods here, right? Those are gods, but they're not God. These are probably not demons. Why are Shadim translated? Why is that translated as? Because we thought that when the Torah talked about the word, used the word Shadim, that it maybe was a demon because of some of the other context for where it's used elsewhere. Here, it definitely wouldn't make sense. But we also learned that in texts that we discovered later, that the word Shadim is very similar to words that Canaanites used for gods that lived on mountains. And these were probably a better translation for this would be mountain gods or just gods, just another name for gods, Shadim, just something we don't call God, except we kind of do. Because we use the word El Shaddai. We're not saying God is the God of demons. Shaddai is connected to this same idea. So we just didn't have a plural of it. But we do now because we found Canaanite text where it refers to Shaddaim, which are gods. So this is just, again, you're worshiping other gods. I just want to make it clear that probably weren't worshiping demons or sacrificing to demons. And it's not, it's like, what's the difference? It's not, it is different. It was not, we're not worshiping demons for whatever it means to you. Also, we don't have any references to demons really in the Torah. But you neglected the rock who begot you, forgot the God who labored to bring you forth. Adonai saw and was vexed, and spurned these sons and daughters. God said, I will hide my countenance from them, and see how they fare in the end. For they are a treacherous breed, children with no loyalty in them. And there's that phrase, I will hide myself from them. That's what Moses said. I mean, we read that before. God will hide from us during that time, right? When we abandon God, God will hide. It doesn't say God will leave us. It doesn't say God isn't there anymore, but it does say God is hidden. God is hidden. Doesn't mean God's not there, right? We don't see God. We don't experience God. We don't hear or see God. It doesn't mean that God's not there. So that's very important. And it says, I will hide my countenance from them, which is a very poetic way of saying, I will hide my, Mary, yours says countenance, huh? Because it's the King James. No, the King James said it correctly, which is face. I will hide my face from them. See? King James has a better translation. His countenance is too fancy. I will hide my face from them. Which is, again, this idea that God doesn't literally have a face, but God's visible presence. When we say to God, when we say in our prayer, may God bless you and protect you, right? May God's face turn towards you and be gracious to you, right? Yisad Adonai panav elecha. May God's face panav, right? May God's face turn to you. That's God's face. Well, here God is hiding his face, God's face from us. Not gone, but hidden. And what's important about this phrase too? The Hidden Face of God, which was a book by my professor, Richard Friedman. Why is this important? Because look at this word, folks, in Hebrew. When God's face is hidden, when we don't see God, and even though God is there, God is astira. Astira, from the Hebrew word histir, which is to hide. Look at that word, folks. The phrase, again, the word astira, is very close to the name of a person, to the name of a book. Esther. Esther. Now we know that Esther's name in Hebrew is actually a derivation, a corruption of the word Ishtar, the goddess of beauty, Venus, the Persian god of beauty, the goddess of fertility. But the rabbis noticed something very cool here, which is that Esther also means hidden. Esther, of course, is hidden. She's hidden from view. But she's also interesting because in the book of Esther, God's name is not mentioned one time. God is not in the book of Esther, literally by name. Yet we believe that God is there in the background. God is, they're doing little miracles, but little miracles, because again, this is the time that God isn't really doing miracles in that way. But God's hiddenness is kind of like, maybe that's the message of Esther, right? That God is hidden, not that God isn't there, but that God is hidden. God isn't obvious anymore. So this hiddenness of God is intimated by the name Esther, Astira. So God's hiddenness is there. It's promised to some extent in this poem. And see how they fare in the end. For they're a treacherous breed, children with no loyalty in them. So I'm not going away, but they're not going to see me, and see how they do. They incense me with no gods, vex me with their futilities. I'll incense them with a no folk, vex them with a nation of fools. So they're going to do this to me, and again, they'll see. For a fire has flared in my wrath and burned to the bottom of Sheol, the bottom of the netherworld, right? Has consumed the earth and its increase, eaten down to the base of the hills. It's gone. Everything's gone. I will sweep misfortunes on them, use up my arrows on them, wasting famine, ravaging plague, deadly pestilence, and fanged beasts will I loose against them with venomous creepers in the dust. That's pretty scary. The sword shall deal death without, as shall terror within, to youth and maiden alike, their suckling as well as the aged, which is their children, their little babies, all the way up to their adult, their older adults, their seniors. I might have reduced them to nothing, to naught, made their memory cease among humankind. But for fear of the taunts of the foe, their enemies who might misjudge and say, our own hand has prevailed. None of this was wrought by Adonai. So if I do it, if I destroy them, then people who destroy them are going to say, we did it. Now, I'm not going to destroy them, because if I do that, then people will think that they did it and it'll all be over. I'm not going to destroy them completely, because I want them to know, I want everybody to know that I've been there the whole time. For they are a folk void of sense, lacking in all discernment. Were they wise, they would think upon this, gain insight into their future. How could one have routed 1,000, or two put 10,000 to flight, unless their rock had sold them? Adonai had given them up. For their rock is not like our rock, in our enemy's own in our enemy's own estimation. So they should know better. And they should look at what's happening to them and say, this isn't an accident. This isn't just normal stuff that's happening to you. I mean, we feel that all the time. We feel that now. This can't be real. This kind of stuff doesn't happen to anybody else. It only happens to us. And here's the interesting phrase that we get led on here. The vine for them is from Sodom, from the vineyards of Gomorrah. Their grapes for them are poison, a bitter growth, their clusters. Their wine is the venom of asps, the pitiless poison of vipers. Yeah, a lot of words for dragons or snakes, vipers. But look at that, Sodom and Gomorrah. These people have become like Sodom and Gomorrah. They are literally as bad as the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so this is what's going to happen to people who are just as bad as the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's us. Or that's what you're going to be like in the future. Or that's what you became. Or that's what we always knew you were going to become if you worshiped other gods. Lo, I have it all put away, sealed up in my storehouses, to be my vengeance and recompense. At the time their foot falters, yea, their day of disaster is near, and destiny rushes upon them. So God is keeping it for time to come when they will come out. Pretty tough. For Adonai will vindicate God's people and take revenge for God's servants upon seeing that their might is gone, and neither bond nor free is left. Now, here's a weird idea. If God's disaster is going to be there, so is this. God will say, where are their gods, the rock in whom they sought refuge, who ate the fat of their offerings and drank their libation wine? Let them rise up to your help, and let them be a shield to you. See then that I am the one. There is no God beside me. I deal death and give life. I wounded and I heal. None can deliver from my hand. So when those gods that you worship fail, right? And when you realize that there is no God but me, lo, I raise my hand to heaven and say, as I live forever, when I whet my flashing blade and my hand lays hold on judgment, vengeance will I wreak on my foes, will I deal to those who reject me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood as my sword devours flesh, blood of the slain and the captive from the long-haired enemy chiefs. O nations, acclaim God's people, for he'll avenge the blood of his servants, wreak vengeance on his foes, and cleanse his people's land. And so that's the good news. The good news is that God's going to wreak vengeance on the people who did this to you. So the bad people who will punish you will also get theirs in the end. They're not going to get away with it. They're doing my bidding, but they're going to get punished for it. And this gets to what we've been reading about on Tuesdays, which is what is with these Babylonians. If Nebuchadnezzar is doing God's will, isn't he just doing God's will? But there's this understanding that there's doing God's will, and then either Nebuchadnezzar went too far or he was just a pawn in this game. Same way that Pharaoh was, which is that they did what they were going to do. And I didn't stop them from doing it, but I will punish them for it eventually. Which is a weird idea, because it's like, do the people who do bad things to us, including the Nazis and everybody else, are they doing God's work? And that's what some people have done with even the worst parts of Jewish history, which is basically have said, these people are doing God's work. They're not supposed to enjoy it. They're going to be punished for doing it because they're still doing something bad, but they're doing what God does to punish us, which is punish us with death, punish us with illness, punishes us with famine, and also punishes us with war. It's a tough one, because that's what some people say the Holocaust was a lesson to Jews who had turned their back against tradition and against God. There are Orthodox Jews who have contextualized the Holocaust as a punishment for Jews leaving tradition. I don't like to hear it. I don't even like to say it. But where do they get it from? They get it from this. Just so you know, and you know what I'm about to tell you already, some of you have already figured out what I'm going to tell you. There are already rabbis in Israel who are saying that what happened on October 7th was punishment. Why? Because up before October 7th, as you know, not sharing a secret that you didn't know, Israel was at its most fractured moment in its existence. where people in Israel were fighting against each other at a level that had never happened before. And there are some rabbis in Israel who are saying that the punishment that came upon us was because we had turned on each other in Israel. I don't necessarily agree with that theology, but it is a theology that allows people to make sense of horrific things that seem to be beyond explanation. Now, some of us could say, again, that God doesn't intervene and doesn't stop horrible things from happening to humanity anymore. That's one answer. Or there is no God, or there is no God that stops bad things from happening. But there's another understanding within traditional Judaism, which is God must have power to stop it. God didn't want to stop it, which means that God had a reason for that happening. Now, it doesn't mean that the people who perpetrated these horrific acts should get away with it. I want to make it very clear that those same people who say that will tell people who are responsible need to be punished and eliminated.
Hey,
Because guess what? God just said, I will avenge the blood of my servants. Right?
I have a problem with this.
Okay, you
My
should.
problem is this, so are the Orthodox saying to me, well, the reason for the Holocaust and the reason Jews are being punished is because you're not doing what we're doing. And if that's the case, and I don't want to be Orthodox, then do I just leave Judaism?
No, but the answer could be simply, again, not in the Holocaust answer, but in the answer of what just happened. The reason why modern Israeli Orthodox rabbis can say that is because their argument would be that it wasn't because Jews weren't following the Torah in the land of Israel. It was because of sinat chinam, which is baseless hatred of one Jew to another, that because in Israel, we were treating ourselves so bad, we were fighting amongst each other, literally coming to blows, that's why.
But that's different than the Holocaust, the Inquisition.
Correct.
The pogroms, because if they're saying to me that I have to go through that because I'm not living the Jewish life that you're living.
Okay, Philip, in all fairness, their answer is, I don't agree with it, and I don't like it. I hate it, actually. But the theology is, understand this, a disproportionate amount of Orthodox Jews died in the Holocaust. So it wasn't like they got away with it, and we got punished because we were not observant. They would say that Orthodox Jews got punished disproportionately too. Disproportionately, they died for our sins to some extent. They were martyred because while Reform Jews ran out of Germany, and this is the stupid, I'm not rationalizing, I'm just telling you what the logic is, or not the logic, but the system. The system is that the Reform Jews who ran out of Germany and survived, who weren't keeping the law, and you're like, well, that guy lived. And the Orthodox Jew in Poland who was liquidated died because of what the other guy was doing. So that's the theology even more so. So lest you think that it's like, well, we're getting punished. Well, no, you may not even get punished. They will get punished because they are the ones who are God's people, because they're still keeping the Torah and they're living and dying for the sake of God. Let's just finish the last line of the poem, and then we're gonna be done with this, because the poem ends, but the portion doesn't, and that's what we're gonna pick up next week. So the last part of the poem is, I'm gonna make those people, I'm going to avenge the blood of his servants. Oh no, that's it, and cleanse his people's land. So next week we're going to start up with chapter 44, which is when Moses was done with that poem. So that poem is not a happy poem. It's not a happy song. It is Moses's last song. It's the last poem, but it's interesting that the Bible, at least again, the way our Torah ends, it ends with a song or a poem before Moses says goodbye to the people. So I have no poem or song to share with you other than this one tonight. there is definitely lots to think about, and hopefully, like this song maybe didn't necessarily give hope or calm people. It kind of scared them a little bit and was more of a warning. I mean, I guess it ends kind of with vengeance or with recompense, but it does remind us that poems and music help us make sense of the world. And sometimes, again, it's the only thing that can calm us and make us, make us feel a little bit more human and less, I don't know what else to say other than the music is oftentimes the cure for a lot of the anguish that we deal with. So on that note, go listen to some music. We will be Friday night having some music to help heal us with Wendy. So, and we'll be here next week in person, Tuesday morning and on Wednesday. So take care, everybody. And we will see you soon. Thanks everyone for being here.
You.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Bye.
Yeah, listen to some music.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.